Hi, everyone. Welcome to Access Chat. Today, we are joined by a returning champion, Thea Kurdi, and um, and also Neil is not here today. Neil is playing hooky and spending time with his beautiful wife, Martina, and he wishes everybody a wonderful, happy Mother's Day that's coming up. I know. In the States, at least. So, Antonio and I are going to talk to Thea, and you might remember Thea from being on the show. We've always been very impressed with Thea's leadership and her work, but she really focuses on the built barriers part of the conversation. Now, you can't focus on built barriers without also including digital accessibility, but she's playing a very different role in this space, and she's been doing this a long time as well. So when we interviewed her before, we really talked about the work she was doing, and so she wanted to come back on and talk about how her work has shifted and changed and how life has changed as it has for so many of us as we walk some pretty difficult times. But we continue to think that Thea has a very powerful voice that needs to be listened to. And we really think brands and governments should be working with Thea, the Theas of the world, because the way we're doing things now are not working for the community of people with disabilities. And that is something that we're all very concerned about at Access Chat. So just wanted to give you that little update first. But Thea, welcome back to the program. You look wonderful. I know you have had a real tough journey walking this, as have I. And so could you just tell the audience where you are? I know you're joining us from Canada, but I can't say the name of your town, so I'm not going to try. But would you just catch everybody up on what you've been doing, where you are, taking us up to, today?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me back and for inviting me to have this conversation. COVID was hard for everybody, but especially for people who had vulnerable people who had compromised immune systems. And that was, myself to some degree, but certainly my husband. And unfortunately, my husband did get COVID and it compromised his heart. And a year and a half ago, he passed away very suddenly. And, I had seen a lot about, being a widow and, Deborah, you being a widow as well. I was not prepared for what being a widow was going to be and what that would mean.
And how society treats you differently. Wow. I was so shocked by that.
And I didn't know how to, process anything. You hear a lot about, you don't remember anything from the first year. And I really remember very little. And I had a couple of other pretty serious setbacks throughout that year, which I won't talk about. But as I came up on the anniversary of my husband's passing, and people were starting to, approach me about, wanting to hire me to work with them, doing what I had been doing before, I had this very physical response of, no, I'm not doing it. And as I started to try to unpack that, why was I so resistant? Because people were saying, you're so important, you have so much experience. It's, really too bad you're not here. We're really missing your voice in the conversation. And what I realized in unpacking that is that I stopped believing in the efficacy or the effectiveness of being an architectural accessibility consultant. And actually, this is something in my 22-year career doing that work, started to become more and more apparent to me about 14, 15 years into it, that we were being hired to look like people were doing something, but it was a gesture, not a sincere attitude of improving access and providing equity of inclusion. So we were working with the same clients over and over again. And these are smart people, architects, interior designers, landscape architects. These are incredibly creative, smart people. And yet, no matter what the client had said they wanted, even sometimes the clients was backpedaling on the information that I was providing to them. If they were like, do we have to do this? Is it in the building code? Well, you said you wanted to do more than code. So I just stopped believing in the process. I think we're stuck in the mud. And
Yes.
when I realized during my career, I was also a professor at university. And I know from teaching, the way to get excellence from people, the way to get innovation from people is not to lower the bar. And universally, that's what I have been seeing. I see buildings that are not accessible winning gold stars in award programs that are being sold as certifications. This building is certified as accessible. And that's not how you do it. You get students and you get better outcomes from everybody by raising the bar, by being critical. You don't get participation awards, which is essentially what's happening is this achievement and this we want to try to encourage people is all about this lowering the bar, handing out participation awards. We want people to feel like they're being encouraged. But what's actually happening is people are learning less is required. I can do less and still get certified. I don't have to do as much as I thought I needed to do. And then now that I have this, gold star, or now that I have a diversity, equity, and inclusion, group, or, whatever it is that they're doing, I can actually sit back because it looks like I'm doing something, but I'm not actually doing something. So the role of accessibility critic came to me as an important part of, if you're going to get better, you have to evaluate, how are we doing? And I, as an insider, sitting on meetings, listening to what people were talking about, knew what we were doing was broken. Our legislation is broken. Our education is broken. The attitudes are broken. That ableism is so systemic that we're not going to get better. And I want us to get better, but we're not going to get better if we don't understand the nature of the barriers that are really the biggest barriers we face for accessibility.
So let me tell just a short story that I think it also helps to illustrate part. When they did the last refurbishment of the Portuguese Parliament, they spent a huge amount of money retrofitting, making changes. That is the place where they have approved legislation, laws to enforce everyone. So what happened when they finished the work is, they finished the work, everything seems to be going well, but then in the term that came next, there was an MP in a wheelchair that was elected to the parliament. Surprise! After all that refurbishment, that person could not take the seat to who he was elected to because they didn't design it in an accessible way for a person in a wheelchair from go to the entrance to have a seat at the parliament. I see this as a kind of an extreme example where the place who has the responsibility is the first to fail.
Yeah, the built environment is very much a reflection of values. So you can see one of the problems we're having is that we're talking a lot, but what we actually find, and it's not just that legislature, I'm sad to say, the House of the People that's supposed to represent the people, including the largest minority group, which people with disabilities are, and all those non-disabled people or able-bodied people are only temporarily able-bodied, non-disabled. This reflection of the built environment is still not allowing people access to the House of Representatives to volunteer as students in those workplaces, or even to be MPs themselves, or leadership, is indicative of the systemic nature of the problem. And unless we acknowledge it, I don't think we're going to make progress. But that's not the only story we have. Yes.
Well, and that's one reason why I started creating Billion Strong, because I was just really worried about, and I did the same thing. I thought, okay, I know, because I've been taught as a little kid that you get more flies with honey. So you be sweet and try to talk people. And so I did. I wrote inclusion branding. I did everything. I've given everything. And I thought if I could convince the corporations to meaningfully include us, that's what we do. We were leaving them out of the conversation. Let's include them. But that's not what happened. What happened, which discourages me, and I've talked about it on air, but it's like somehow we became part of the problem. We, the community, the experts, the advocates, the consultants, we became part of the problem because a lot of these brands, they just want to check the box and then say, okay, done. What else do I need to do? And they have a lot of stuff they have to do. They do. It's a ridiculous amount of work that they all have to do. And to just on everything. I mean, everything they've got to do all day long. But at the same time, this is not a game for the community of people with disabilities and people that are aging into disabilities. This isn't a game. The other day, I posted about a brand that has been a star in accessibility, digital accessibility for years in the UK. And they put out a brand new big release. They didn't make it accessible at all. And then I see Jonathan Mosen, one of our leaders that's blind, saying to blind people, all right, okay, so let's do this. And let's ask them to let us back in and talk to them this way and be nice when you're asking for your access back. Could you imagine doing that to other communities? So we're going to have to be real nice to beg you to please include us again, even though I don't know why you excluded us. And so, I took to the airways with that. And I usually don't do that, but you know what? I think that more of us leaders are going to have to be brave. Thea, I think more of us leaders are going to have to be brave. And we're going to have to say now that, because we suspected some of this, but since COVID, we've seen it so clearly and chillingly. And even what, some of these groups are saying about DEI, and we're tired of this woke crap. All we were saying as a community, we don't give a crap if y'all are woke or what. We just want to live our lives and have access to be able to bank by ourselves, be able to go into buildings by ourselves, to be able to live. We just want access. We don't really care which brand wins. We don't care. But if you're a brand that's meaningfully including the community of people with disabilities and people aging into it, what we have to do now is we have to convene and we have to thank those companies. We have to thank them by rewarding, by talking about it, by buying from them, by being their consumers. But at the same time, Thea, I think this is what you and I are seeing, and others are seeing this. And some people were ahead of us in seeing this and starting to fight back. But it feels like we now are in a fight because we're going to be excluded. We're being excluded from what we were being included in like a month ago. We just got cut out of. And so do you think community, y'all think this is going to stop if we don't really, really figure this out? And then we have business to business groups that are trying to support businesses, making sure we're included. But we see some of them creating programs, indices and stuff like that, that actually allow a brand to get out of including us, that allow a brand to get an advantage in the court systems in the United States. And I
So,
can speak for the United States, and that the United States has cut budget for accessibility and disability inclusion. They are cutting people's jobs. We are in a major crisis in the U.S. Of our rights being taken away from us even more. Sorry. Antonio, you wanted to say something.
no, I just uh, we have the the ability to listen to others, to listen to the community, and many people are actually doing it. And to be fair, we have seen some very interesting progress in many different areas over the years. And I feel that today, when we talk about these topics, there's not really a need for us to explain ourselves as much as we had to do in the past. So I think that's positive. But why do you think that organizations who have the ability to listen and who in some cases actually they have listened, they have done interesting job in listening to others, listening to the community, then when they go to the part of executing, they don't use that information and that knowledge that they gather from listening in order to make things happen? Why is that?
Well, I don't entirely know. I'm sure everybody has their own thing, but I did notice, and I'm sure you noticed this too in a lot of different ways. COVID impacted almost every industry in that a lot of people in senior positions retired. And what I noticed, like even like our local coffee shop, that the level of service suddenly dipped. Like initially there was a dip because of the supply chain problem, but there was a noticeable skill drop. Like the travel agency that I traveled with this past winter, things were missing. Things went wrong. They forgot to pick up a bunch of us from the airport, and there was no order to pick us up from the airport. And then when we tried to get in touch with them, there was nobody to get in touch with. So I see a lot of institutional memory loss. And unfortunately, this is where things like policies are supposed to kick in.
Right.
But even with diversity, equity, and inclusion, before COVID, we saw people had to start saying diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility because it was DEIA. And we were getting pushback from diversity, equity, and inclusion saying, we have other things to deal with. Can we wait on accessibility, forgetting about the intersectionality of that? Forgetting, in whole, everybody's excited about sustainability. In whole, forgetting, look at the demographics. What are these buildings and services you're providing or products that you're making and being used in these buildings? And focusing on buildings, but, transportation, healthcare, education, all of these things. Look at the demographics. The numbers in Canada, in the most recent statistical data collected by Stats Canada, 27% of the Canadian population are now self-identifying, which is a flawed number process, but self-identifying is having some type of disability, and it's not just wheelchair users, which is the other problem. So
Right.
again, I'm seeing people go through an education system, and if we thought about manufacturing something, if you were manufacturing a product, and every time this product came off the shelf and people tried to use it, something was broken with it. If you were a smart producer, you would go back to the factory, fix it in the factory so that no units came out with that defect. And we're not seeing that feedback in the American Institute of Architects and the Royal Institute of Architecture of Canada. We don't have the self-reflection. We don't have the mandatory improvements. All of the, and I'm speaking from architecture, but all of the architecture, interior design, landscape art, none of them are taking that back into the institutions where they're teaching the next generation of people, when they're teaching the sustainability, to look at the demographics, to look at how much more expensive it is to fix inaccessible spaces, to make them accessible after the fact, doing major renovations to add elevators that weren't there, versus the cost and benefit of including it from the start. And then the other problem I see, Antonio, in terms of listening, is I see people who don't really want to be accessible, who are playing the game of, look, we're doing the right thing, shopping for accessibility answers. So they'll find the people who are and promote those people who are saying, these people are doing such a great job. And
Right.
again, that critical analysis of, are we actually doing a good job? Are our policies actually aligned? Is our education system actually working? Has been, I think, a critical missing piece in making real change and progress.
I agree. I think that, a lot of us we were hoping that we could convince people to do this and really teach them how to do it. It's not that hard. I mean, there are a lot of moving parts and that gets complicated, but I felt the same way. I would go in and I would consult with these companies. We would give them all this data that we worked really hard to acquire this data. And it just started feeling like, just check the box. Well, what I'd rather do instead of hire you, will you just come on and talk on this panel for me? Because it's going to look, just because I'm hosting this accessibility panel, like we might be doing the right thing. And so y'all get off our back and y'all leave us alone. And it's I mean, it's just become really bad. And I think our community is making a mistake playing this game too, because I see people with disabilities that want to speak for these companies because they can get so much money, and I get it. And our community, often our consulting community, we really struggle with cash flow across the board with this stuff because it's not taken seriously by society. It's not. And they're thinking they can just check the box. But I think there's enough of us starting to really that actually, like you said, I've been in these conversations. I know what happens. I know what is happening. I know sometimes it looks to me like there's a group of leaders that all they do is just go to conferences. And I'm sure they're working hard and they're playing hard, but I'm not sure those efforts that they're making with all these big brands that are also out there doing this, it doesn't translate back to access for us. And that hurts me. That hurts all of us. So that's why I haven't been attending conferences in the same way. And I just don't want to be the show pony anymore. It feels like a lot of these corporate brands are just wanting us to pretend like they're doing the right thing. And also one more thing, which we talked about off air, but I'll say to you, Thea, because I know you want to talk about this too. I'm also getting tired of the groups that are giving awards to these brands as a moneymaker. I was asked to do this. Somebody came in and these are lovely people. And they said, Deborah, we're going to do this and we'll make it the Deborah Rue Award. And then every time they apply, they got to pay whether they win it or not. Okay, I understand how that could be valuable for me, that I can make money for doing nothing. But that just feels like the wrong thing to do to the community. So just because you've seen a brand win an award for accessibility, or they've won a gold standard for their designs in, digital and barrier, take the time to find out where that award is coming from. Is it a legitimate award that we care about as the community of people with disabilities? For example, the Zero Project Awards. I'm an ambassador for them, but these are legitimate awards where they do peer to peer and they dig in, and they don't give them to just everybody. But some of them you can buy the awards. Quite a few you can buy that award.
Deborah, so how can we convince and convert people to realize that their actions can have a real impact on people's lives in an active way if they don't really do the right thing? How can we make them realize, okay, you are really having an impact on people's lives if you don't take this seriously?
Yeah, this isn't a nice to have. This is an impact. But let's give the floor to Thea, and you talk about that.
Well, I think part of the problem is, and we're seeing this change, right? The frustration, you've expressed, Deborah, that I've been expressing, Antonio, you've been seeing in your work in the disabled community, is much more visible now than it was. The offline conversations I'm having with almost everybody I talk to is rage and frustration. Yes. And I think, again, this is why the critical aspect of you say you're doing a good job, is it actually a good job? This idea of, as you said, Deborah, buyer beware. Look into, if somebody's saying, we can do this thing for you. If your building gets certified as accessible, does that mean that it won't be, it's free of a human rights violation? I think and in many cases, they're not. Some of these buildings have won awards and then been taken to human rights tribunals and found to be lacking and been fined and have forced to change. And the owners, are like, but I was certified,
right.
They
I won an award.
I won an award. I trusted this organization. So I think there's now I'm starting to see a change in, if we're going to train people, I'm seeing the rollback into, we're going to have to train about ableism, because people are not ashamed to be ableist. And I think that's the thing. Like, if you said to someone, this is very racist, they would be, oh my gosh, no, but ableism, there's a degree of acceptance about, ableist thinking and the bias about what disabled people. They don't see disabled people as people. They don't see them as equals, even if like their legislation here in Canada recognizes and has for 40 years that disabled people are equal citizens under the law. And yet the Canadian government didn't update the National Building Code to reflect that. And then education wasn't updated to reflect that. So, for 40 years, you say this is illegal or this is, how you're supposed to see people. It's like being a parent, right? If you say to your kids, I'm going to count to 3, and every time you count to 3, nothing happens. People don't take it seriously. Like if we had, I think one of the critical missing pieces is we don't have a police force for accessibility. Right. So we have police forces to enforce the laws, and there are penalties. So if you have a seatbelt law, do you remember when we were younger, seatbelt laws were not taken seriously because they didn't enforce them. Right. When they first passed drunk driving legislation, it wasn't taken seriously until they started putting roadblocks up and breathalyzer till you couldn't get home without, hitting one of these roadblocks. And you were not just going to be fined, you were going to have to pay more for insurance. So this was like, people don't take it seriously because it's the right thing to do. They don't take it seriously. And this is sadly, they should, because it's in their best interest. It will help them and their family and their neighborhoods. But that's not the reason people do things. There might be some motivation there, but to put it over the finish line, you have to mean it. You have to enforce it. And so here we have a Accessible Canada Act. We have a Canadian Accessibility Commissioner. This person so far has not been allowed to enforce the legislation that we passed. We gave a 20-year deadline to improve accessibility, not start in 20 years, but fix things before 20 years are up. And the Accessibility Commissioner was supposed to have the role, as the legislation was written, to enforce fines, to, and you don't necessarily want to step out immediately and say, smack people on the hand and hand out a fine. But I'm telling you, people are scared when they read legislation. But if you don't enforce it,
and if you start enforcing it, it is noticed very quickly.
Yeah, and in the last Portuguese government, we have a Secretary of State that was someone with a disability, but that doesn't reflect it in any progress.
Right.
While the government was in office, there actually no progress. The person might be a really nice person. She might have the best intentions, but then the ministers and everyone around, they just see her as, they don't see her as
tokenism. Ableism is tokenism. I know that we only have a few minutes left. Yeah. And what we want to do, besides always thanking Amazon and My Clear Text for helping Access Chat stay on the air, but Thea, we can talk about how frustrated we are and how things are so broken and we know things aren't working, but how can we now take this knowledge that we know and start changing things so that we are included, as Antonio said? But don't they understand that when, for example, you just take away all of our access, that you're impacting people's lives in really powerfully negative ways? Why don't y'all understand this? This is not a game to us. So what do you have any, what is the hope for the future, Thea? What could we do to actually start feeling like we're having meaningful progress?
Well, there's a lot of things we can do. One of the best things I've started seeing is ableist training. Like, go, if you're serious about this as an organization, you did sexual harassment training, didn't you? Maybe it's time to start instituting ableist training so that people really understand the impacts and maybe the accidental things that they're doing. I believe most people are not bad people. But Deborah, to your point, they don't care that they're making it harder for people because they think it's a small group. They don't understand the impact. 70% of people with disabilities have invisible disabilities, according to much of the research. So when I say to people that 27% of the population have disabilities, they said, well, where are they? we're all these wheelchair users.
Right here. Well, they're not all wheelchair
We're
users.
not wheelchair users. And the international symbol of access, being a wheelchair, is a great symbol, but it also sells that idea that we're only talking about wheelchair, and usually manual wheelchairs, which are smaller and maybe a little bit more mobile. But people don't care. You know, there are greedy people out there. They're trying to make profit. They're trying to be a good organization for a lot of things. I worked the game in trying to jump onto the sustainability to point out, if you're making good sustainable choices, you're also making your building more accessible. So trying to land on that.
They don't care about that either, though. They don't care about the sustainability. They don't care about our planet either.
No, exactly.
Even though we live on it. Oh, sorry.
It's got to be, the whole role of government is the carrot and stick, right? So what do we say? The reason we have government is to try to do what's best for the people.
Right.
And the corporations are supposed to do what's good for corporations. But if the government doesn't mandate fixing training, doesn't require licensing to be changed to include accessibility, if the courses, and these are things, I want to hope to work with people, I can come in, as I've done with other things, and look at the courses you're providing. And I can do a detailed analysis to tell you, are your assignments, is your curriculum, don't have one course on accessibility. Accessibility has to be integral to the design. So you have to train people from day one that 100% of people will get disabilities. They're born with them, or they get them. So this is good design. This is sustainable design. Young people are really clued into helping people. So get to the young people. But from a corporation standpoint, if you're frustrated, because I hear a lot of people in corporations are frustrated themselves. I hired an accessibility consultant and the building still has problems. What's going on?
Oh my God. I hear that too. Deborah, we hired this big accessibility firm to make us accessible. And then we just got this big lawsuit filed against us. I said, well, did you go back to the accessibility consultants you went to? Yeah. What are they doing? Well, they don't know what to do. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Well, as an accessibility consultant, I was working with an architecture team. So a building that we worked on, they didn't listen to us. We issued 5 reports that something was a hazard, a danger hazard that people were going to walk in and hit their heads on. And because it wasn't in the legislation, and because the organization hadn't asked to see the accessibility reports, they didn't know that the architect was deciding for them. We don't have to listen to that. Right. So there's the accountability part of, are you being listened to? And that's why I decided I can't do this anymore, because I wasn't being listened to. I was getting paid money to write reports nobody read and nobody did anything about. But organizations who are frustrated, and this is again a role that I hope to be playing with, and I'm talking to people about, is do an alignment of your policies. Your policies are written to say, this is what we believe. This is what we're reporting to the government. This is what our workplace, all of these things. If your diversity, equity, inclusion, your workplace, your sustainability plans, your accessibility commitments to the government under legislation are not aligned, then you get the left hand and the right hand doing different things in your organization. And this is why you're frustrated. And this is where you get the breakdown, because someone can point to, well, this says we can get away, with not doing that. But ours, this document, we're focusing on this document right now. So they silo information. It's not coordinated. So I think, other than being honest, is this working or not? And if you're continuously having problems, it's not working. Other than getting ableist training to really find where are we going wrong with this thinking here, because that's the basis of decisions, and then aligning your policies and changing your education requirements. I think those are the key things that we could really make a difference. Otherwise, it's going to continue to be a shell game of, look, we're trying, and nothing's changing.
But I also think that another place that we can make progress is by our community talking about it and calling a little bit of BS on what we're seeing. And those leaders like you and I that know what's happening, we can't keep pretending that it's not happening. And so we actually have to take action as a community. We must convene. I posted something yesterday about a brand that has once again always been very accessible for like 10 years, and they just put out a major release. It's totally inaccessible to people that are blind. And so you know what I think, and when I posted this, I tagged the National Federation of the Blind, the American Foundation of the Blind, the RNIB. We are so strong together. We really could be so strong together, and we would be heard in a different way if we all came together. And so I think there's the obligation of the processes and everything that needs to be done to get it right, but also the community must come together, not just to complain, but this is serious to us. This is access. We can't live independently if you're taking our accessibility away from us. So whether it's the built environment, digital, all of it together. And also we should not be talking about the built environment and then the digital in separate corners. These are the same things. We've got to come together in all of it. But I'm also hopeful that, we'll figure it out. But Thea, if somebody wants to come and, work with you and get you to help them, how would they find out about your work?
Well, right now I'm just getting this whole thing started. So I've been doing everything on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. I was doing a podcast many years called the Accessibility Advantage. And I changed that to make it something that was a little bit more honest, right? A little bit more edgy. So the accessibility edge was the name that I landed on, because it is an edge. It is an advantage to be able to service more customers and keep more employees and hire more, great talent from a larger pool of people. So there is an edge to this. So the organization right now is called the Accessibility Edge, building off of that brand, and you can find it through LinkedIn right now. But yes, having the courage to bear witness. As our friend David Lepofsky did with his hashtag AODA fail, which AODA is a legislation. Just bear witness. You don't have to be critical. You just post a picture, and if we can come up with a billion strong sort of fail thing to highlight so that people can search for it, and then they can just see picture after evidence, right? Because that's
evidence.
The problem is people are telling themselves they're doing a good job. Where's the evidence they're not doing a good job?
Well, but they're telling
them where the barriers are.
Right. They're telling themselves they're doing a good job. And then we have people that are also telling them just to make money with their little awards and stuff like that. So that's hurting us. And then we have investors making really bad decisions. Yeah. So there's groups that are hurting our community by saying they're helping. So so anyway, Thea, thank you so very much for being on the show today. Once again, shout out to My Clear Text for keeping us fully accessible, and Amazon for supporting the show. And we really appreciate the audience too. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Antonio. Sorry we missed you, Neil. We'll talk to everyone next time.